So I'd like to say hello to everybody. Good afternoon to everyone joining us here in New York, and good afternoon to everyone in Ireland. Welcome to the latest installment of New York Irish Center's The Story Continues. This session's theme is 5 years after equal marriage. My name is Stephen Long. I'm the Cultural Director with the New York Irish Center, and we're thrilled to be joined today by award-winning writer and journalist Sadhbh Walshe, and world-renowned drag queen and gay rights activist Rory O'Neill, also known as Panti Bliss. Following their conversation, we'll have time for a Q&A. All attendees right now are muted and you can't be seen. So at any point during the discussion, if you'd like to ask a question, just click raise your hand at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and after the conversation is concluded, we'll invite you in to ask your question. To get things started, I'd like to introduce the New York Irish Center's Executive Director, Paul Finnegan, to say a few words.
Thank you, Stephen. Well, first of all, let me welcome everybody to the call. The latest in our series of The Story Continues, one of the events that we hold regularly in our space at the New York Irish Center. Now we've been able to move it online, and we're especially grateful to have the presence of Panti Bliss with us today, the world-renowned Panti Bliss. And thanks to Sadhbh for helping us through this by moderating the interview ahead. And I'd also like to thank the New York Irish Center LGBTQ committee for helping me put this together, for helping us in the past and helping us get this together today. And a shout out to Stephen on my staff, who's done great work putting this together from the technical aspect. So I've often said it's great that we've had Zoom in this era, because if this pandemic had hit 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, it would have been a lot worse. So, but it has been a challenging time, and groups like the New York Irish Center, this is the time when we must and do rise to the challenge. So in a new reality, for example, today we've been delivering our lunches to our seniors to their doorstep. Normally we have our seniors come to our center, and it's a great spot for socialization and staying connected for them. That's gone away, the physical community coming together, but we have, with the legion of volunteer drivers and participating restaurants, we have been able to send out a lunch to them on a weekly basis. And it's not just about the nutrition and all that, it's about the connection. It's about feeling that they have a place that they're connected to. And that's one of the great things about the New York Irish Center. It's a sense of building community, giving people a safe, welcoming space. Another great project that the New York Irish Center got involved with in the last few months, and I'm extremely proud of, was a thing called Sláinte 2020, which was like a clearinghouse for all the goodwill in the community for those that were suffering most in our community. They would be the restaurateurs and the construction workers that were basically, as of March 16th, completely, their income was completely taken away. And many of them did not have any access to the public assistance that was brought in an emergency during that time. So in this past 3 months, Sláinte 2020, of which the New York Irish Center has done Trojan work in, has delivered $500,000 to those most in need in our community. And it's testament to the Irish community, especially in New York, how we really rally when things are tough. I remember Hurricane Sandy, I remember 9/11, we did similar gargantuan efforts. So very proud of that. So we must continue to be here for those that need us. And one of the things that we have been doing in the past few years is building a safe and welcoming place for the LGBT community within our walls. We had a great event planned earlier this year in April called Outing the Past. It was the second time we were going to do it. We did it last year for the first time, a wonderful, wonderful worldwide festival, of which we were the first American venue for it. Unfortunately, COVID-19 put the kibosh on that. So we do plan to get going with that again in the future. I will say, though, that one of the saddest things of the COVID-19 crisis was the loss of our dear friend, LGBTQ committee member here at the New York Irish Center, and brilliant and wonderful activist for rights would have been Tarlock McNeilis, who passed away due to COVID-19. So we're very, very sad about that. We will pay sufficient tribute to Tarlock in the future. He was a wonderful, gentle, great friend. He had become a great friend of mine, and I miss him dearly. So we are continuing to look at all the things that where the New York Irish Centre can do its part.
Oh,
Lost you, Paul.
yeah.
All right,
The
Paul,
fact-
you're frozen.
Oh,
I'm frozen. Can you hear me?
You're good
Yeah.
now.
You're back.
Okay. Yeah, I know the old internet. So just to finish up by saying we are looking at all aspects of social justice as they pertain to the Irish. What has come up recently in the United States, which of course is the original sin of the United States, and that's racial discrimination. We are looking at ways we can play a part in creating a welcoming space and helping racial justice. And one thing is, there's a lot of mixed race Irish among us now, and we would like to find ways to create a welcoming space for the mixed race Irish within our community. I have 2 mixed race Irish kids in my house, so you know it's close to my heart. So that's our next thing we'd like to embark on. But in the meantime, we continue to solidify our work with the LGBT community, making it welcome here and providing a voice for this community and creating a safe and welcoming place. So with that, Stephen, thank you, and I'll hand it back to you, and you'll take us from here through this, and to our moderator, Sadhbh. And again, thank you, Rory, for joining.
Thank you, Paul. Okay. So I'd like to introduce everyone now to Sadhbh Walshe. Sadhbh is a New York-based Irish writer and journalist. She's written op-eds and features for The Guardian, New York Times, the New York Review of Books, NBC News, the Irish Times, the Chicago Tribune, and Al Jazeera America. She wrote and directed the award-winning short film, Miss Bertram's Awakening. Her feature script, The Fiddler, was a 2017 Page Award and Slam Dance finalist. She was an associate producer for the TV pilot The District and staff writer for the syndicated TV series. She's currently working on a stage play. Welcome, Sadhbh.
thank you. Thanks, Stephen. And hi, Rory. I kind of
was very disappointed not to hear the Connacht Tribune listed in that.
Yeah, I did write for the Limerick Leader, though.
Okay,
So yes,
that'll do so.
yes, and I was featured in the Limerick Leader because when I was in Ireland, I launched a stop dumping campaign. So yeah, I have some local credentials. But anyway, I feel like you need no introduction, but in case anyone is not aware, Rory is an entertainer and an author and a bar owner and an accidental activist and a gender discombobulist. Has a gate named after him or her, and is Ireland's reigning queen. So that's quite a lot to fit into your 50 odd years here. But anyway, we're here today mostly because 5 years ago, Ireland became the first country to legalize same-sex marriage by popular vote. And that shouldn't be a big deal, but of course it is a big deal. And it's even more of a big deal because about 25 years previously, it was a criminal offense to be homosexual. And so maybe before we talk about the referendum and stuff, it'd be great to go back a bit to the late 80s, early 90s in Dublin, when you were a young boy from the country, coming of age at a time when your very existence was illegal. So how was that for you?
I actually have mixed feelings about it because on the one hand, of course, it even seems to me so nuts that I was out of college and everything before homosexuality was decriminalized.
Yeah.
I was actually living in Japan then at that time. So I went through all my college years and all of that, technically breaking the law, at the weekends. It was a good weekend. And and that all just seems so nuts. And it had a really, it sort of killed the spirit of the queer community at the time. There was it was so very hidden and underground. If I'm talking to young people, I sort of explain to them, and I sort of say it's a bit like Harry Potter and the Muggles, you know, because the Muggles had no idea that the gays even existed, really.
Yeah, I know. I remember I saw in your documentary you spoke about that there was an underground club. Was that around like Stephen's Green or something?
It was, yeah. It was on Ely Place, just off Stephen's Green, yeah.
Yeah, and the people were walking by. So I'm not that, I'm a few years younger than you, but I remember being in Dublin at that time and someone saying, "There's a gay club there," and I'm like, "No, there can't be."
Well, I always laugh because I'm saying, you know, that just finding another gay person then, you know, you had to be Angela Bloody Lansbury just to find them, you know. Whereas nowadays it's so above ground and in the sunlight and all, that anybody's grandmother could tell you where Panti Bar or the George is, you know. They all see it from the bus and they know where it is. And whereas back then, literally nobody knew where the gays would gather. And so, and also, the community then was almost, by definition almost, more radical than it is now, because in order to get to the point where you were so fed up that you were going to go and find these other queer people and that you were going to cross the threshold into these sort of secretive, hidden places, you had to really get to the point where you just couldn't bear, you know, the Muggle world anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of necessitated you then taking a radical look at everything, and sort of thinking, well, if they're really wrong about this, maybe they're wrong about everything. So it was a very specific kind of community you were finding, you know, then.
Oh.
And nowadays, of course, it isn't as radical because you don't have to give up everything to join that community anymore. You know, you can bring your mother to the bingo show in the George on a Sunday, you know. So it is very different. And for me personally, while of course I am delighted at the changes, and I'm delighted that I can go down to Ballinrobe, County Mayo last summer to launch an LGBTI coming out booklet produced by the gay group in the Ballinrobe's youth club.
Wow.
Like mind-blowing to me.
That is mind-blowing.
You know, so I am thrilled about all that. But if you're going to ask me personally, quietly, I'll tell you that it was also kind of more exciting and fun when it was super underground and forbidden and bad.
Yeah.
And sometimes I see people bringing their mothers to the drag show, and I'm like, get your mother out of here. She's not meant to be here. So I'm thrilled about it, but you know, it does seem a little less exciting somehow.
I can imagine. And like one thing I sort of, you know, I spent the last day or so sort of dipping into your life a little bit so that I, you know, ask you interesting questions, hopefully. And one thing I did think was like, I mean, if it hadn't been illegal, if your whole, you know, if things were just as they are now, like would Panti Bliss ever have been born? Would you have would you be Rory the accountant, you know,
well, actually, the chance would probably be higher that some sort of Panti would exist, because nowadays with RuPaul's Drag Race, every kid in the country wants to be a drag queen, which is also just unbelievable to me. But it certainly wouldn't be the same, because I got into it because, well, obviously because it's fun and ridiculous and all those things, and you know, and when you're young, especially, the job of a drag queen is to run around a nightclub and get drunk and be the life and soul of the party. And you know, what 22-year-old doesn't want that job? I mean, so I got into it because of that, but I stayed in it, I guess, because it was transgressive and discombobulating and kind of punk. I mean, it is, at its core, it's very punk. It's very sort of two fingers to all you people who, you know, say I shouldn't or whatever. And also, I think if you're, when you grow up as a queer kid, and especially as a gay boy, and you get old enough to understand, and your peers do, or even to sense it, they start to make your sort of make your life miserable by coming at you for being feminine, or doing this that they thought was too feminine, or this, or your hands, or the way you walk, or what you're wearing, whatever it is. And they're weaponizing your your queerness or your femininity against you, and often to make your life miserable or whatever.
Yeah.
And then it starts you hating that stuff about yourself, and you're constantly self-policing, trying not to have a limp wrist or not cross your legs in public or whatever it is, all that stuff. And it's a really just not a, it's a horrible sort of time in your life. And drag then fixes all that, because it sort of takes all of that stuff that they made you fear in yourself, and it sort of reflects it back as a kind of power and fun and color and excitement and all that. And so it's sort of life-saving in that sort of way to a lot of queer people, to take all this stuff and, you know, throw it back as, you know, power, all this stuff that was pointed out as a weakness in you, and to find a sort of strength in it. I mean, that's what drag, I think that's why most drag queens are attracted to it, you know, at a core level or whatever.
Were you?
So it definitely, to answer your question, I suspect I'm just a little, I'm a closeted little performer regardless, and so something would have come out. But would it have been Panti? No, I don't think it would have been. I mean, I think she was a product of her time.
Yeah. Well, I love that about the idea of weaponizing effeminacy. Is that the word? And I mean, even just as this, you've said many times that, you know, women are still regarded as weaker sex and all this nonsense. And, you know, but it bothers me like that. To you know, the word girly is an insult, you know, and like that's used by Arnold Schwarzenegger, called someone a girly man. I'm like, you're the governor of California and you're you know, using girls as an insult. Like it's strange what's accepted, you know, and not questioned at all. So I love the idea of just taking that and turning it on its head. And
people often come at you because they think, you know, they say you're impersonating a woman and it's a offensive parody. So this is just, you know, stuff I've been dealing with recently on Twitter again, but it comes up all the time. But, you know, to me, I'm not impersonating a woman. I've never thought of Panti as impersonating anything.
Yeah.
She's what she is. But also, it's never been about impersonation. Like, no one's going to think Panti's a real woman. And that's not the idea. You know, my ambition was always to create something that really had its own gender or none, and that's the whole point of drag for me anyway. Or one of the main points of drag is that I'm being playful with gender. I'm saying I don't care about gender and these kind of rules that are totally arbitrary about, you know, what a woman should wear or look like or act or all that stuff, and what a man should. You know, they are entirely arbitrary. I mean, you only have to go back 50 years when pink was the boy color and blue was the girl's color. So these things are totally socially invented. So, and I just don't want to care about them. I mean, as I sit here in a blue check shirt, but you know what I mean. And I suspect if I didn't have drag in my life, I probably would be a much more flamboyant dresser as a boy, but I get a chance to wear all the shiny things and all of that, you know?
Yeah.
But to me, it's not a parody of women at all. It is sometimes a parody of those expectations that society puts on men and women.
Yeah.
And especially, I think, women get the raw end of the stick. I mean, I would like if men could feel they could wear pink trousers and not have to freak out about it, but at least, you know, gray trousers don't actually physically hurt you. Whereas lots of the things that women are expected to do are like literally crippling. You know, you walk 100 meters in a pair of stilettos and you'll know about it. And
I know. Today, as I mentioned earlier, I put on a dress in your honor for the first time in 4 months and put on some makeup, and like, what a pain that is, honestly. The one upside of the pandemic has just been comfort, you know.
Well, but there are some ways where I would love to be able to wear a dress on the bus and not have to worry about it. So
well, we'll keep pushing that envelope, and we might get there. Well, so before I talk about the referendum and stuff, I just a little bit more on Panti. So it's been like, is it 30 years now approximately? You're living with this
Over, I think.
character or exploring this character. And I'm, you know, and it sounds like you've got a very good handle on it now. But like, how has it evolved for you, and what has it contributed to your life?
Well, one of the things that I sometimes feel I have to sort of explain to people outside the queer community is the sort of the kind of gay drag that I came up from, because it's very different to say Mrs. Brown, for example,
Yeah.
or Dame Edna, for example, where it's a straight man playing a female character, but it's a character he puts on, and that character can only exist within the fake created world that they've created for her. So Mrs. Brown can't exist in the real world, and it's the same with Dame Edna or whoever. Whereas in the kind of drag tradition that I come from is where we are working in nightclubs with, you know, the same bar staff every week, and customers who come to see you regularly, and you're getting taxis from one venue to another and all that stuff. And if someone comes up to you who's seen you, 50 times in different places, and they say, hey, oh, how's your mother? I heard she was sick. They don't want a fake answer from a fake character about a fake mother. They're asking me about my mother. And people on the gay scene, they're very used to that. So they have no problem with the fact that the line is very blurred between the performer and the performance.
Yeah.
So, and Panti is a character that is different than me, but she's only a part of me, if you know what I mean. She's not totally distinct from me. And in essence, her backstory is my backstory. And it's just there's a little added extra to make it more fun or whatever. And she is just certain elements of my character enlarged, while other elements are sort of dampened down, but she's not unrelated to me. So, and sometimes if somebody, I don't know, some TV program or something, they want to talk to me, but if they want to ask serious questions, they think they have to have Rory. Wow. And if they want to have a silly thing, they think they have to have Panti. And so I was saying, no, you can ask Panti a serious question and she will give you a serious answer. It's likely she might stick a joke or two in along the way, but you can ask Panti a serious question because she's real in that way. The way I try to explain it sometimes is, if you have a job interview tomorrow, you will turn up in this version of yourself where you have your nice suit and your hair is back and you're speaking well and it's all very polite and proper. And then if that evening you go off on your summer holiday with your best girlfriends from way back and you go to Ibiza, and 12 hours later you're hanging off the balcony of some nightclub with a gin and tonic in your hand screaming to ABBA, they're both you. None of them is a lie, but they're just different versions of you. And that's how I see Panti. So not entirely separate to me, just me through another prism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've been reading, or I am currently reading a book. I can't remember what it's called, but it's something about one of these, the constant search for oneself, those kind of books. And I think it's called The Authentic Self or something.
How's the search going? Sorry.
Yeah, it's never ending, and yeah, better some days than others. But the general, I don't know the answer yet, so I'll tell you when I know. But the general gist of the book is that it's your consciousness that's yourself, not your outward presentation. Yeah. But I still just think it's interesting to have such an elaborate difference in the presentations, and we all have our layers of that. But
yeah.
It's kind of also,
because a drag queen is people know what a drag queen is, and they're in on the kind of joke, for want of a better word. And so people react differently to Panti than they do to me. And they're often more open with Panti than they are to me. Possibly one of my suspicions is because they just think, oh, she can't judge me, or she won't judge me because look at her, and so that is, that's very obvious. And there's things that I can say to people when I'm dressed in drag and get away with that I could never really say to them if I'm just wearing a shirt and I'm Rory. And it's a little bit like the court jester of olden days who could tell the king that he was fat or whatever, and not get his head cut off. There's a social function that it, you know, fulfills, and it just, I don't know, it also just makes life more fun and interesting and colorful sometimes. Yeah, and so you know, like, people, there are of course drag kings that, you know, they are, but I always look at them and think, God, you have a harder job here, because who the hell wants to look at a man standing on a stage? You know, a stereotypical man in a gray jumper with a gray shirt and brown shoes. I mean, that's what men are expected to wear. And so that's why I think even, you know, heterosexual male performers often, you know, they take on these elements of femininity for their stage personas, you know, whether you're David Bowie or Prince or whoever, because it's just visually more interesting. Women were given all the tools of peacockery, and men were given gray.
Yeah, something needs to give on that. You know, we need to share it around a little bit, I think, and you know, take some of the pressure off women, and also, yeah, I agree, it's boring. You know, the outfits are boring, and in certain.
But even emotionally and stuff, you know, women are allowed to be big and expansive, and you know, and have big emotions. They're allowed to cry at things, and they're allowed to whatever, scream. Whereas men are expected to be constantly gray and dull, you know, and unexpressive. Like, I know American men won't even cross their legs, right? You know, on the train or whatever. And they're not allowed to cry unless it's over a football team. You know, all this kind of nonsense. So, I mean, it disadvantages both sides of it, I think.
Yeah. No, and I'm just thinking, like, my nephew is 16, goes to school in Limerick, and every single boy in his, there's one haircut. You notice that? There's literally one haircut, and I can imagine if you deviate from that one haircut, it's probably very tricky for you with among the other boys, you know. So that's tough. Although women are also now having just one hair.
Yes.
It's this kind of thing. And actually, when I was younger, I had for about 12 years, I had the, you know,
Jennifer Aniston,
Sinead O'Connor type thing, you know, not shaved, but like no, I didn't do. I had really short pixie cut, that kind of thing, and like your hair now, maybe slightly longer. And it wasn't for any statement or anything. I literally just was hot one day in Manhattan, and I was like, cut all my hair off, please, and did that. But women have one haircut now, and it's just like long and straight.
And I actually thought during lockdown, a lot of them started to look much better. I kept saying to them, "Oh, I love your hair," and they're like, "Well, I'm doing it myself at home." And I was like, "Well, don't go back to the hairdresser." You know, they're all doing because they couldn't get it bleached properly and everything. So I thought they looked good after a while.
No, I think it is. So so let's talk about Ireland for a bit. So was it 1995 things were decriminalized, and then
93 decriminalized.
Oh, 93, and then 2015 was the referendum, and so I was away for pretty much all of that time, or most of it, and the referendum to me seemed to come out of nowhere. Now clearly it didn't. I know there's always been you know, people pushing for gay rights in Ireland, but once it got into the, you know, once it got onto the stage, it seemed to happen very quickly. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what were the drivers and why it suddenly just?
Well, I think there'd been a lot of background work happening for a long time, and one of the advantages of being a small country is it is relatively simple, I think, to make a social change. I mean, social change is always hard, but you know, I don't think it's really possible to be a normal Irish person now and not know a gay.
Yeah.
You know, even whether you're in Ballinrobe, County Mayo, or, you know, in Raheny in Dublin, you know, everybody has a neighbor or a cousin or whatever. And that's because over time, people came out and, you know, more and more and more over time, until eventually you got to that point. And I think Irish people also generally have a sort of sense of fairness about them. And if they know gay people and know that they're not eating babies for lunch or whatever it is they're painted as being, I think they want to give everybody a fair shot at happiness. And, you know, so it got to a point where most Irish people knew a gay person. And most Irish politicians, of course, generally don't want to be spearhead anything, and they don't want to be like pushing. And I think they fell behind the general public's ambitions, and politicians were behind the curve. They thought it would be more divisive and everything than it was. The one thing I would say, though, it wasn't quite as slow as that, as fast as that, because we did actually have civil partnership for 2 years.
Okay.
And that was actually very interesting, because it shows you the power of the modern world and the internet, because there was the older cohort of activists here who had spent years, you know, building towards this sort of point in time in Ireland. And they had done it the old way, which is often with, you know, backroom meetings with politicians and discussions and, you know, quietly and shaking hands and getting the right person at the right time to do this, that, and the other. And that was all good. And they felt strongly that civil partnership was a good step, first, you know, step, and that eventually then, you know, when people, you know, got used to the idea, you could maybe get to marriage. But around that same time, as civil partnership was sort of coming to you know, to fruition in a way, there was a whole new generation of younger people that up until then I felt were very apathetic. I used to give out about it all the time. And they were being influenced by the internet and by campaigns they were seeing in other countries, including the US, for marriage equality. And they sort of leapfrogged, in a way, the older activists, and they had an attitude that civil partnership is second-class citizenship and so on and so forth. And it was actually one of the only big rifts in the community. It actually became quite divisive. And younger activist groups were set up to push straight for marriage. And there was a lot of tension. And I remember that the year, whatever year it was, of Pride, that year, the tensions kind of spilled out, and even on stage, there were some angry comments and stuff. But in the end, even that helped, because it got young people on board with the idea in general. And sometimes a little bit of anger, even if it's at your own community, helps. And so
why was there resistance to?
Sorry?
What was at the core of the?
Well, for younger activists, the resistance was they felt that civil partnership was a sort of second-class status, and they were just like, you know, we're either equal or we're not.
Yeah.
A younger idealistic point of view, and the older activists were taking a more pragmatist view that civil partnership was a good start or stepping stone to marriage, and they felt that had a better chance of success. You know, they may have been right too, except that then the push for a referendum happened, and you know, the government at the time got legal advice that a referendum was necessary. Now, not all legal opinion agreed with them, and so it's interesting to think what might have happened if they'd gotten different legal opinion.
Yeah.
Because doing it by referendum is where it gets very interesting, I think, from an Irish and a global point of view, because I don't think anybody would recommend to other countries to do it that way, because it's risky.
Country. Anyway.
Yeah, well, you know, it's very risky. If you don't get the right answer, you might have to wait another generation or something.
Yeah.
It's also, you know, ideologically, I don't agree anyway that, you know, the majority should get to vote on rights for minority groups. I think that's just a bad idea.
Yeah.
And of course, referendum campaigns, as people in Ireland know so well, become really divisive, unpleasant. And especially, I think, for the queer community and for younger people, it was a really hard time to be walking through town. These posters are everywhere saying, you know, you're a danger to children or whatever it is, all this stuff. So it's not pleasant, it's difficult, it's risky, and you have to get, you know, thousands and thousands of people on board and to go out and start knocking on doors, because that's, you know, Ireland, you absolutely have to do that. Those, you know, you won't win without it. And so it's hard and it's not nice. But having said all of that, it is a much more powerful way of doing it. And, you know, so in Ireland, take for example, say France. France has had marriage equality much longer than we've had.
Mm-hmm.
But France did it like every other country, legislatively. And it is still a live issue in France. There are still demonstrations about it, there are still groups campaigning against it. And technically, a right-wing government could come in France and take it all away. Whereas that is not going to happen in Ireland because it's in our constitution, and to take it out, they'd have to have another referendum, and no one's going to go near another referendum. And it's such a done issue here that I think even if you went to David Quinn or whoever, any of the leaders of the No campaign, and said to them, you know, they would say, oh, that's finished. We're, you know, we lost that one, that's done. Because it is done, it feels completely done. And so that is quite a powerful thing in itself, knowing that it's very secure. And secondly, Irish queer people are in a unique position in the world because we're the only country in the world that knows to a percentage point what the rest of the country thinks of us.
Yeah, who's on your side.
And so no matter what anybody says to me on Twitter or whatever, I know for a fact that at least 67.3% of the population, you know, think you're the dick. Not, you know, and I'm cool. So, and even that, in a way that I totally did not anticipate, and is very powerful. Just knowing that, like before the referendum, I suspected most people were fine with me. I guessed they were. I wanted to believe they were, but I didn't know it. It turns out that knowing it is very powerful. And I think immediately from the day of the referendum, the queer community here feel very secure in their place in Irish society and their position.
And I think it was healthy for, sorry, I think it was healthy for the society too.
I agree.
You know, thankfully it worked out, because I was afraid that wouldn't pass, even though the polls were so far ahead. I was also afraid the abortion referendum would fail, which would have been a disaster for women and would have meant...
And to be honest, I don't think the abortion referendum would have happened at all if it wasn't for the marriage equality one. Because I think one of the other knock-on effects it had was, and you still see it now, is that especially younger people in Ireland feel that like immense social change is possible and that they can make it happen. And in a way, they're right. I mean, you know, obviously there was a lot went on to get to that point, but you know, 7 years ago, there were not thousands of young people out marching in the street for different issues at the weekends, and there are now, because they feel quite rightly that they are capable of making changing things, because they've done it twice already, like in big, remarkable ways that nobody would have anticipated 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I too was very afraid, because the polls are often nonsense. I don't know if you remember, we had a children's rights referendum a few years back, and when at the beginning 99 point something were in favor, because who is against children's rights? But you know, then the arguments start, and then RTE has to follow the regulations and find some crazy person to come into the studio to argue against children, because they have to give these people 50% of the airtime. You know, there's all the Kenna judgment, you know, all that stuff. So by the end of it, it only just scraped past with 50-something%.
Yeah.
And so that was always in the back of my mind, that, you know.
Yeah, I know. It's a huge risk. But so after it happened, you know, it was exhilarating, obviously, and the whole, I love those days in Dublin Castle where everyone is like, it's just the country's having a party, and it's just, you know, I cry every time I see that footage. For both of those referendums. And I think you said maybe in your documentary that you know, that day or the day after, or a couple of days after, you were seeing gay couples, you know, holding hands and, you know, doing all those things. And one of the things that also came across in I think in your TED speech, you talked about how gay people have been denied this right to public intimacy or private public moments in a way. And that, you know, that is something that I hadn't fully considered, you know, like what that must mean. And probably a lot of people don't fully consider it. But so, you know, so of course the referendum has done, you know, the big stuff, like you can now get married, you now have equal rights. Have those littler things that are also big, have they delivered in the way that you had hoped? Is that still the case, or are you?
Yeah, no, I think to a certain degree or a large degree, I mean, you still now regularly see, you know, gay couples and that holding hands on the streets of Dublin or whatever, in a way that you absolutely did not see 6 years ago. And, you know, is it all perfect? No. You know, things are, you know, it doesn't mean that every homophobe is, you know, is gone. And it also doesn't mean that, you know, whatever gangs of young people don't pick on difference still or whatever. And I don't know if writer Gavin McCree, for example, a couple of months ago was attacked by a gang just walking along the canal in the afternoon while they're all screaming faggot at him and stuff.
Wow.
So of course bad things happen sometimes, but has the general thrust of things changed? Yeah, it has. And the referendum was a large part of that, because it aired out a lot of dirty laundry. And I often sort of say, well, the example I kind of use is, you know, before the referendum, if you were, say, two 17-year-old lesbians and you were in your first flush of love and all that, and you were at the bus stop late at night and you felt like holding hands or something, before the referendum, they probably didn't. And they probably didn't do it not so much because they were afraid somebody would, you know, beat them up or whatever, because thankfully, in general, Ireland's not, you know, that like that. And it wasn't even particularly that some Egypt might, you know, say something horrible to them or whatever, because, you know, 17-year-old dykes are used to it in a way, in some ways, you know, whatever. The real fear was of being isolated and alone, because, you know, that you'd be at that bus stop, that some drunk idiot would say something, you know, horrible to them. And the real fear was that the other people at the bus stop would agree with him, even if they did nothing. That was the fear, that you are going to be, you know, othered in that way, and that you'd be alone in this situation. And I think that is the fear that really stopped most people most time, you know, being obviously themselves. Whereas now there is a kind of sense that even if some idiot does say, oh, fucking dykes or whatever at them, well, those two girls know that, well, actually, at least 67.3% of the people at this bus stop think you're the asshole.
Yeah.
You know, and they're cool with us. And that alone, it has just freed people up to be themselves more. And so is the situation perfect? No, I don't, you know, not what's ever perfect, whatever. So of course there'll be things, and there are still times that it, you know, bothers me, even annoys me, but are things vastly, you know, better than they were when I was 17? Yes, they are. And are they even better than they were before the referendum? Yeah, they are. And also, I, you know, get to travel around a lot, and often with the Department of Foreign Affairs, and sometimes it's to places like, you know, I was in Sarajevo, for example, and Sarajevo is a really, really difficult place to be queer. There are no gay bars. There's one bar for kind of misfits, you know, and it had been attacked by skinheads, you know, 3 times in the previous month when I was there. And if you're a young gay person in Sarajevo, it's miserable, and you must feel like nothing could ever change, and it will always be like this, and it's hard, you know, depressing.
Yeah.
And then along comes this bloody Irish drag queen who gets to tell them Ireland's story, and I'm able to say, you know, when I was your age, Ireland was very similar. It was pretty grim for gay people, and now the whole of Ireland voted yes to allow gay people to get married, and they're all cool with it. So it's actually a really lovely thing to be able to do, to go to those places and tell Ireland's story. And because Ireland's a great example of change being possible and dramatic social change being possible. And it's a good news story, and it's a kind of a, you know, not to be too overly cliched poetic about it, but it's a kind of a, you know, a candle of hope or something, you know, for people in other parts of the world where it's dangerous to be.
Yeah, and where rights are being taken away, like Hungary and Poland, and, you know, and here as well, and not so much, well, they're trying with the LGBTQ, they failed recently in the Supreme Court. But, you know, there's constant attack, never ending on women's rights, never ending. And you know, so yeah, it's been a great thing. I have so many more questions to ask you. I haven't even got halfway through, but I'm conscious that
yes, all of them. Just yes.
that the other people probably have things to ask. So, Stephen, do you want to take questions from the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a question here from Sean O'Hay, who's actually from the Irish consulate here in New York. I'm going to allow him to talk and he can ask his question now.
Sure.
Go ahead, Sean.
Great. Hope everyone can hear me.
I can, but very low.
Sorry, I'll try to speak much more loudly.
Oh, that's better.
Thank you very much. And Rory, I saw you in $3 bill at the bar in Brooklyn last year, and it was a great performance. And I brought some American friends who really enjoyed it. And the themes you touched on are really universal, I think. And just to say, it would be great. I know you were mentioning about the various travels you've had with Foreign Affairs, and it would be great to have you over here in New York sometime when it's safe to do so, and even appear on the Irish float at Pride, if at some point New York Pride doesn't coincide with Dublin Pride, as I think it has over the past few years. I just wanted to ask you a question. There's been a bit of focus in recent days, I think, on Roderick O'Gorman, a new minister, and some sort of statements that have been made about him. And one point he appeared in a photo with Peter Tatchell.
I've had it myself. They've dug up 2 pictures of Panti with Peter Tatchell, which now apparently means I'm a paedophile sympathizer. It's nuts.
I just wonder, what do you think is the right approach to do on this? Is it, he was criticized, I think, for not responding straight away. Do you think you always have to respond to these things? Or
no, I think your instinct, sorry to cut you off there. I think your instinct as a human being is you want to respond. I wanted to respond. But at the same time, the people who are making these crazy accusations, they don't want a response. They're not going to listen to a real response. And if you start responding to every crazy on Twitter, you'll spend all your lifetime doing it. So I think he was in a very difficult position, as a new minister. Do you respond to that? Because they're making a lot of noise, but there are only tiny number of these wild conspiracy theorist nuts, for want of a better word. So I sympathize with him, but if I was his advisor, I would have told him to just ignore them because it's so crazy. So I don't know. That's a terrible answer to your question. But yeah.
No, but it's reassuring, I suppose, in a way, to hear that you think it is just a tiny group of people within Ireland.
Well, it's the same ones that crop up all the time. And, every now and then they form around one thing that they think is shocking or something. But you see the same, profiles online all the time. They're the ones who are also pushing the whole 5G gives you COVID and all this stuff. So do you really have to respond to all of them? I don't know. And I get it from a personal point of view, that having that accusation put out there, even if it's crazy, non-crazy people will see it in passing, and there's the whole thing, well, there's a bit of smoke, is there any fire? And that's really horrible to have thrown at you. So I understand why he felt he had to, but also this is all coming out of craziness where they're also implying poor old Peter Tatchell, one of the most famous and long-running LGBTI activists in the world, who's been beaten up in Moscow and beaten up by the President of Uganda's bodyguards, who has put his life at risk so many times. And he's also the most honest person in the world. He'll tell the truth whether it helps him or not. The idea that he is some sort of pedophile sympathizer is also so insane. So even to respond to it, I felt bad when I read the response by the minister, because I felt like if I was Peter Tatchell, I'd be thinking, you're kind of suggesting that there's something to apologize for in being in a picture with me. And I'm proud to be in a picture with Peter Tatchell, not, so yeah, it's just an awkward situation created by numbskulls.
Yeah, and social media. So thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Sean. We've another question here. It's From Christine, she says, thanks for doing this. The Trump administration is trying to roll back LGBTQ rights in subtle and not so subtle ways to appeal what they perceive to be their base. As an accidental activist during this election year, what advice would you give about engaging in debate and positive conversations with folks that might not agree with you?
You know, the hardest part of changing people's minds about things is that you do have to talk to them. and I am guilty as anybody else that sometimes I will say a smart ass comment or shout or whatever, because sometimes you're at the end of your tether, but that has never changed a single person's mind. And I think also it's harder in a country the size of America, but nonetheless, the truth is that the only way to change somebody's mind on an issue of social issue is to let them get to know you and into your life. And so you queer people have to constantly expose their own selves, and sometimes to strangers, in order to affect change. It's basically the process of coming out. That is what changed the world in respect to LGBTI rights, and that still holds true today. It's very easy for people to hold prejudices and weird ideas and all of these things against people that they don't know or think they don't know. But that's much more difficult, to hold these kind of same prejudices or, crazy ideas about, Tom who's cutting your hair, or, Mary who's working in the post office. Do you know what I mean? Once you know them as real people. And sometimes, letting people know you can sometimes be awkward and weird, especially to strangers. And sometimes it's not pleasant because you're trying to get to know, or, a dialogue with somebody who's been screaming that you're a danger to children and you're this and you're that and whatever. So it's hard. But nobody has ever been really convinced by a poster to change their vote. They're only convinced by getting to know the people that the poster is about. And that sounds so trite in a way to say, but it is true. And that can be done on, literally on a one-to-one personal level by talking to people at work or whatever, or in your life. But it's also the most effective campaigning strategy to tell your story in public when possible. That's what moves people and what makes people see queer people as individuals and as people just like them. And most people, even the ones who are waving horrible signs and all that stuff, even they, when they get to know people, they want most people to have the opportunity to be happy. There aren't that many psychopaths out there, so it's not easy. There's no simple, easy answer. It's a lot of hard work. You need a lot of volunteers. You need a lot of money, in your case anyway, in America's case. So there is no easy answer. But the base of everything is allowing people to know you and see you as a real person somehow. And then I think most people will want you to allow you to be happy. And
having figureheads like you would help to.
It's not that so much, because often I think sometimes it's the postman who tells his story is more powerful in a way, because people relate in other ways, or whatever. And also, that person doesn't come with baggage already. Like people already have ideas about me or whatever, and sometimes that can get in the way. But it is true that it's easier for me to get out and tell my story because just the way the world works. People will give me the platform or whatever. I wish there was an easy answer, but
it never is. Stephen, do you have any more questions?
Yeah, we actually have another question here from my colleague from the New York Irish Center. This is Ryan. I'm going to let him in now. All right, Ryan, you're on.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Rory. It was just, I suppose I'm from Tyrone, so it was kind of a bittersweet moment 5 years ago when the marriage equality was passed in the rest of the country, and we were sort of that kind of feeling of being once again kind of left behind and the kind of the bad child up in the north, the kind of. So I just want to know what your feeling was, suppose, for the LGBTQ activists in the north, and obviously recently there has been passed, but with a lot more friction and more political sort of controversy.
Yeah, well, because they didn't get to do it the referendum way, and the unexpected benefits of that. But I actually felt really bad for Northern Irish peers, especially because in some ways they had led in certain areas up to then. You know, they took high court cases earlier than we had done down here and stuff. But of course, the problem, the Bloc in Northern Ireland was a cynical use of a mechanism that was a part of the peace process, was being used cynically for something that it was never meant to be used for, which was to block social legislation. And so Arlene and co really had a power that was much greater than their numbers deserved. And so it was this really sort of awkward situation, because I spent about 3 years after our referendum saying to my Northern Irish compadres, you know, it can't last forever. You know, don't worry, any day soon they can't. And of course, you forget how deep go the things in Northern Ireland. And so Arlene and co really did put their foot down and kept their heel down to the very last minute until they found a mechanism to get around them. So I'm delighted for them that up north that they got it eventually. But you're right, it was they spent a few years of this sort of miserable, weird position where every buddy around them, including all other parts of the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland, they could go and get married legally in any of those places, no problem, because they were citizens of both of those political institutions. And then they would drive home, and the minute they crossed the border, their marriage ceased to exist. So it was such a weird anomaly, the kind of thing that only Northern Ireland can throw up. The Northern Ireland has been the same in Brexit as it has in marriage equality. This the anomaly and the little stone in everybody's heel. But thankfully, for Northern Ireland and for the vast majority of Northern Irish people, because of course, all the way along, the vast majority of citizens of Northern Ireland on both sides of the cultural divide, if I might say, and were in favor of marriage equality. So Arlene and co were just totally out on their own on that, but they were using this cynically using this mechanism to block legislation. So yes, I'm delighted for them, and they had a party as big as ours. I mean, just 5 years later, which is too long. But anyway, it's all done now.
Thank you so much. It was a great conversation. It was a really great listen today, this morning.
How long out of Tyrone are you? Because you sound like you just left last weekend.
Oh, I'm still fresh off the boat. I'm only here 3 years, so I'm still still pretty green. But thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen, do you have other questions or?
That's it now. I'm very conscious of the time here on our Zoom. Do you have anything you'd like to follow up with, Sadhbh?
Just one last thing to close us out. As I said, I've been absorbed in your world for 2 days, and my big takeaway is that you seem to have an awful good time, and I'm sure that you have terrible times too, and lawsuits and all sorts of inconveniences, but in general you seem to be enjoying the ride. And so do you have advice for the rest of us who are straight or gay, to have a good time?
Yeah, I don't know that it's advice, because I never did anything because I had any sort of long-term plan. And but I also kind of had the luxury of that in a way, because in the bad old days, when I was 19 or whatever, a job at the bank was not possible for me, because the bank didn't employ flaming queens. And even if I got a job as on the lowest level or something, I would never have been promoted up the line because flaming queens didn't happen then. So all of those things that my mother would have pressured my straight brother about, a good job, you know, marrying a nurse and settling down with a chocolate Labrador and a Toyota, all of it was not available to me. And I was aware of that. And while that was a pain at times, of the things that I was excluded from, including a sense of being fully Irish, by the way, I felt very excluded from that. At the same time, that is also very freeing when you can't get that kind, you know, a good job, and you can't, you know, marry a nice nurse, and you can't do all that stuff. There's something quite freeing about that you can sort of live in the moment and do things because that's what you like doing. And I did that for a long time. I just did what I liked doing. And if it seemed fun and interesting to me, I gave it a go. But I didn't worry about the things that I would have had to worry about if I had settled down with a nice nurse. I had the luxury of not having kids to feed and all that at the time. So I think for your 20s anyway, nowadays, you know, how many straight people are in their 20s? I think in your 20s, you should try and do everything and not worry about the bank job. Start worrying about that when you're 30.
Well, exactly. And, you know, the pandemic might be the opportunity for us all to recalibrate a bit on that score, because no matter how sensible you are these days, it can all be taken from you.
Yes.
You know, 30, 40 million people lost their job here and whatever. So, so yeah, time to roaring 20s, you know, that's what I'm heading into.
It's never too late, Sadhbh. It's never too late.
Absolutely. There's this, everything happens for a reason, right? So thank you so much. I could talk to you for so much longer, and I'm sure other people would feel the same. And thank you to the New York Irish Centre for making this possible. I wish it could have been in person. I look forward to the next one in person, and to the LGBTQ committee for organising. And
thank you for the fun and easy interview.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Sadhbh, and thanks, Rory. On behalf of the New York Irish Centre, I just want to sincerely thank you for being so open and honest and generous with us in this conversation. And Sadhbh, as usual, a tremendous ability to drive the conversation and ask compelling questions. I'd also like to thank the LGBTQ community of the New York Irish Centre for organizing it today. Thanks to Sean O'Hay from the Irish Consulate here in New York, some great friends and supporters of the New York Irish Centre. And City Council member Danny Drum, who wanted to join us today, sends his apologies, he couldn't make it. And thank you to everybody who joined us. Please visit our website, thenewyorkirishcentre.org, and subscribe to our newsletter for our latest updates. And you can learn about the next LGBTQ event that we're going to have. So thank you.
Thanks a million.
Thanks, Rory.
Bye.
Bye.